Okay, we're good. Go for it.
Good. And wait a couple more minutes. We got some folks arriving. Let's give it a good 2 minutes. How about that?
Okay, sounds good. Do you want to get going?
Yeah. Hey, Sandy. I just saw her pop up. Got a lot of friends on there. I see Dave. I see Dee down there. All sorts of folks. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. You know, this is going to be an interesting night. The reason that this is going to be an interesting night is because very rarely have I gotten the opportunity to kind of go through my story of how I got here, how I have got to the place of doing the work that I do. So if I slow down or if I look funny or anything like that, it's because Allie is the only person that I can see, and it means that she has given me a bad reaction. So if that happens, it is her fault. With that said, I wanted to open us up in a quick moment of prayer. God, you guide us all through interesting moments. Moments, of course, define us, but more than that, your movement and your hand, your grace and your love define us. Bless us this evening as we gather together in this moment. Amen. All right, so this is how this thing's going to work. I have pulled together over a dozen clips of different points in my work and in my ministry to share with y'all. But before we get started, I had one thing that is not a clip. And I'm thankful that Emily, first of all, Emily is taking the children upstairs because I just heard a toilet flush behind me, which means that they are heading upstairs. Thank God. But we have 5 children. I guess I should say that. Madeline, get out of here. Okay, sorry. Can y'all see this, Allie? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
That's good enough. So I just wanted to hold this up to start everything off. This is the first protest I ever attended. This is me across the street when Troy Davis was executed. You know, at that point, you can see my hair is a little bit longer. I was a little younger. Me and Emily had only been married for a couple of months. But I say that before we get started, just to say that we all start in this work somewhere. And when I was standing across the street when Troy Davis was executed, I had no idea what I was getting into. No idea that I would be here in this moment talking about all of this, these places and spaces traveled in pursuit of ending the death penalty. So as we kind of push through this evening, I want you to kind of think about your moments, where you started, where you're going, and really what your clips would be. What are the moments that you would share? All right, Allie.
Minister handcuffed and put in jail. He crossed the line protesting outside the execution of this inmate, Adam Ward, an execution that happened on Tuesday during this Holy Week. News 8's Tanya Iser shows us the moment police took Reverend Jeff Hood into custody.
At 6 p.m. Tuesday, the Reverend Jeff Hood made his stand against the death penalty. At the very moment Adam Ward was being put to death for a 2005 killing, the Denton resident walked up to a police line keeping death penalty protesters back.
I told them I was coming across, and they said, "No, you're not."
Hood knew full well he'd be arrested. It was something he felt God was leading him to do.
I mean, I felt the Spirit with me.
Hood, a Baptist minister, drove to Huntsville that day, fully planning to commit what he calls an act of civil disobedience.
We're sitting here in the middle of Holy Week, where Christians are celebrating the beauty of the atonement of Jesus, and yet we're still killing for the sake of atoning for evil.
It wasn't his first arrest. He was arrested outside the White House at a rally of pastors protesting deportations, and again at a Black Lives Matter rally in Dallas.
Here is my robe.
Your protest robe.
I guess it's kind of a protest robe.
He wore that same robe Tuesday. We talked to Hood, who's a spiritual advisor to several death row inmates after his overnight stay in jail.
For me, I count it as a particular burden to keep doing this, to show Christians that you can't follow Jesus, you can't love your neighbor as yourself, and keep on killing people.
He's back home in Denton, back with his wife and kids.
I want my children to look back and say my father did all that he could do to stop the state of Texas from killing people.
Tanya Iser, Channel 8 News.
That was just an incredibly, I guess, difficult moment for me. You know, it's frightening to step across the line. It's frightening to get arrested. It's certainly frightening in a place like Huntsville, Texas. And yet, when I crossed that line, the state said, "You're going to step back. You are not going to proceed one step further." And I said, "No, I'm not." And I could see the officer just seething and shaking. He was so angry that I did not do what he said. In order to push back against the death penalty, you've got to make the powers that be seethe and shake. When I got home that night, I began to pray and to wonder what I needed to do next. Later, I got a phone call from Adam Ward, the gentleman that was executed that night. I got a phone call from his father. And his dad told me, "I didn't think that anybody would ever stand up for my son like that." You have to push back. You have to make the powers that be angry. You have to cause them to seethe and shake in order to get to a place where we recognize humanity. Humanity.
Reverend Jeff Hood, he is one of the people who planned the protest in Dallas last night. And Reverend, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and our thoughts are with you and everyone there in your city. You were one of the organizers for the protest. Tell us the reason for it, and what was the atmosphere like before the shootings?
You know, certainly here in Dallas, just like in many other parts of the country, people were upset about what happened in Baton Rouge. They were upset about what happened in St. Paul. And we wanted people to have a healthy place to, engage their anger, to grieve, to comfort each other, to network. And, this protest started out as a really beautiful thing. And we certainly accomplished those spaces of anger, those spaces of grief, and those spaces of networking. And, as we marched through the streets of Dallas, there was a real solidarity, a real peace. I mean, the police remarked that this was an incredibly nonviolent protest considering the amount of people that we have. And we turned, coming home, it had been a beautiful protest, and we turned to come home, and I was sitting there and I was talking to one of the sergeants at the police department, and all of a sudden I heard, "Pa, pa," and I look up and I see two bodies on the ground, and I heard, "Pa, pa, 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 pa." And when you engage something like that, I mean, obviously here in America, we're so used to violence that when you engage something like that, your initial thought is, oh, it's a firecracker. It's not real. And as, I sat there and I looked, I was touching my body, I was touching my chest, because I really felt like it was possible that I was shot. And so as the sergeant ran towards the shooting, I ran back to tell the crowd, back up, active shooter, run away. And things went from beautiful to evil very quickly.
It did very quickly like that. And we said the majority of the protests around the country have been peaceful, but there's always the concern that something not like this, but that there could be some altercations. Just describe more of what other people were doing when all of this was taking place, when the shootings were taking place.
Certainly. People were, walking down the street. I mean, there was perhaps a little chanting, and, the energy was high. But we were winding down. It wasn't like we were kicking back up. When this happened, we again were taking it into the ending. We were landing the protest, landing the march. And it just was astonishing to me that how quickly things changed.
To use the president's words, a tragedy like this, he said it was despicable, a word that many people are using, and horrific. So many emotions about what happened there in Dallas, of course, not just there in Dallas, but around the country. And also, as you had mentioned earlier, those police-involved shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana. As a reverend, what is your message to people in these troubling times, Reverend Ward?
Stop shooting each other. Stop shooting each other. Turn to love. Love is the only answer that we have to heal our communities. Stop shooting each other.
Murder is never the answer. Reverend Jeff Hood, thank you very much. And again, our thoughts and prayers with everyone there, especially the officers and their families in this time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Reverend Jeff Hood, he is.
It was, just an unbelievably disturbing moment. I was leading a protest. I was marching, leading a couple thousand people. The emotions were high. There's no doubt about that. But we were pushing through. Philando Castile and Alton Sterling had been murdered in the days prior. We were determined to make sure that the entire world understood that Black lives matter. And as we're marching down the street, shots ring out. You see officers diving, bodies exploding. And at that point, I had always been sort of, when you're involved in these protests, you're sort of a leftist in that, you don't look at the police as your friends. And yet in that moment, the script flipped in that all of a sudden it was the police officers that were saving all of our lives that night. I had a sergeant that was assigned to me when I would do these protests in Dallas. And as soon as the shots rang out, he dove in front of me. And I was carrying, I had a cross. I had a big wooden cross. Y'all probably seen me carry that thing before. And I turned around and I was swinging that cross back and forth like a hockey stick, trying to get people out of the way. The thousands of people who were behind me. Again, life draws us to spaces where the script flips. We don't know how to describe things. We don't know how to move forward. We just know that we need to love. And that's what I tried to do.
Jeff Hood, he was one of the organizers of the march and quickly condemned the shootings today.
Never in our wildest dreams would we have imagined that 5 police officers would be dead this morning.
But critics were quick to point out that we were hearing a very different message from the Reverend just a short time before the shots rang out last night. Here is some of that.
But I'm going to channel an old preacher that I admire tremendously, Jeremiah Wright. Yeah! And I'm going to say, God damn white America. God damn white America. White America is a lie. Come on now. I'm sick of the bodies of black and brown people being slaughtered in our streets.
Jeff Hood helped organize the rally in Dallas and was a witness to the police shootings. Thank you for being here tonight. Do
Thank you for inviting me.
you have regret over those incendiary statements? I am not tying the shooters' behavior to them, but do you have regret over those now in the wake of what happened?
Yeah, I think obviously if I had to go and do it over again, I think I would have chose different words. These words, were meant to illustrate some of the anger and the rage that was in that space. And a lot of the times when we're in those spaces, there is a need to speak to what is being felt in that space. Obviously, what I was saying was that there needs to be an end to white-controlled America. There needs to be an end to white dominance in America, that we have to come together as one America. And I hope that now, after the shooting, as a day of, turning to love, turning to justice, I pray that we will do that.
Do you think you'll change your rhetoric? In those remarks, you referred to the police as the enemy, and told people that they needed to get a fire under their backsides and do something. And there's incendiary rhetoric on both sides sometimes. But this kind of thing in the wake of this slaughter, does that kind of language need to stop?
I think it's important that we talk about love and justice now. I mean, and for me, I want to definitely speak truth to power when it's necessary. But I can't imagine anybody going through this and not examining not just their rhetoric, but a lot of their lives. I mean, we have got to find a way to get to justice and love.
But, I mean, you understand when you condemn white America, you're talking about those white cops who got killed, who were standing there trying to protect your right to protest. And these cops down in Dallas had nothing to do with those officer-involved shootings that became controversial. And in fact, they'd been tweeting out earlier in the night pictures of themselves with some of the protesters standing for peace. And so you understand when you condemn the full group like that, how damaging that can be.
Sure, and I think, as far as I'm concerned, what I was condemning was the infrastructure of white dominance. And I think that we still have to have a conversation about that here in our country. I don't think there's any question about that. But, obviously, this loss of these 5 police officers is devastating. I am devastated. I feel like I haven't been able to stop weeping. And, I want to do everything in my power to bring people together in justice and love.
Well, I know you were very close to the gunfire and had a major scare of your own, and for that, I am sorry, but I appreciate you coming on and taking the tough questions tonight. All the best.
Thank you.
Well, the chief lesson learned was don't ever go on Fox News. You know, it was such a time in which you know, there was this idea that we have to police language. That somehow language at a time of desperation and anger is the same as language in a time of hurting and pain. So often we are told what language we can use, what words we can use. You know, every time I watch that clip, and I've watched it a number of times, I will never forget the feeling inside of me when I'm looking at the camera. There's no monitor, you can't see her, and you can only hear. And one of the first things I hear is, "God damn white America." And I thought, this interview is going to have nothing to do with police brutality, Black Lives Matter. It's going to have nothing to do with anything. This is going to be a situation where she is going to try to control the narrative, and control the narrative she did. There wasn't a whole lot I could say except to respond to her. I'll say that when we protest executions, when we fight against the death penalty, so often we allow certain parties to control the narrative. We allow those who are in the government to control the narrative. We allow those who are pushing certain ideas for victims' families to control the narrative. And certainly a whole host of others try to control the narrative. One of the things I learned in Dallas was you say what you need to say and don't look back. Say what you need to say and don't look back. A lot of days I struggle with that clip, and I even talked to Allie about whether or not I even wanted to include it in this conversation. Because on one hand, yeah, I'm glad I was apologetic. And I'm glad I was compassionate and generous. But on the other hand, I'm disappointed in myself that I didn't push back harder and say, hey, don't you dare police my language while we're in a situation where centuries of violence are playing out in front of us. That doesn't mean anybody needs to die, but it does mean that this situation is much more complicated than you policing what I had to say.
Oklahoma's 6th execution in less than a year. Benjamin Cole was put to death this morning at 10:22 for the 2002 killing of his own daughter. News 4's Caitlin Ogle was one of 5 media witnesses to watch the execution play out in McAllister.
Since News 4 went inside and witnessed the execution, I can tell you the execution went pretty smoothly. Benjamin Cole used his full 2 minutes to say what appeared to be a prayer. Meanwhile, baby Brianna's family says they wish it didn't take 20 years to finally see justice.
He should have been executed many years ago.
Because 20 years? Give me a break.
Baby Brianna's aunt and uncle feeling relieved Thursday, speaking minutes after Benjamin Cole was put to death at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Attorney General John O'Connor says it was, quote, carried out with 0 complications. In Claremore, 2002, Cole told investigators he was trying to get the 9-month-old baby to stop crying by forcibly bending her backwards. He snapped her spine 5 days before Christmas.
Brianna cried and interrupted his video game, and he killed her. She died a horrific death, and he gets off easy and gets to get a little injection in his arm and go to sleep.
Cole's attorneys claimed the 57-year-old had become largely catatonic from untreated paranoid schizophrenia, saying, quote, he became progressively more detached from reality, refusing to leave his cell, moving little and with difficulty, and rarely speaking to anyone.
He has thoughts that he is the Messiah. He has thoughts that he is going to resurrect in 3 days.
News 4 chosen to witness his final moments, his last thoughts coming out as a prayer or stream of consciousness.
The day of the Lord is at hand. Choose Jesus while you still can.
I pray that you receive my spirit as I forgive everyone that I have done wrong, which didn't really make much sense.
It just proved that he's been faking this all along.
I didn't think he would even say anything today.
At 10:22, Cole was declared dead, something Brianna's family has been waiting to hear.
This is justice for Brianna Day.
This is her day.
In McAllister, Caitlin Ogle, Oklahoma's News 4.
And Brianna's uncle says he plans to speak to legislators to try to figure out how to speed up the death penalty process.
After Cole's prayer, officials asked if he was finished. That's when he said his last words. Yes, sir.
Obviously, we have skipped forward a number of years, and I wanted to make sure that we got this string of executions that have come in the last 18 months. But one of the things that's most important about the execution of Ben Cole is that I was put in touch with Ben in the final month to weeks of his life by my dear friend, Cantor Mike Zeusman. And as I talked to Ben, it was very, very apparent that Ben was very sick. But at the same time, it was also very apparent that Ben was very interactive. Ben was by no means catatonic, even largely catatonic. He was very lucid and very available every time we talked. In the midst of all of this and me speaking to the media, again, the language police showed up in a different form. I was encouraged by Ben Cole's attorney to not talk about the relationship that I have with Ben. Because if I talked about the relationship that I had with Ben, that would mess up the narrative that he was catatonic. Often, when you police language and when you police human beings that you have a tremendous amount of power over, you dehumanize people. You take away their voice. In a lot of ways, Ben expected me to be his voice. And his attorneys wanted to shut that down. I couldn't let that happen.
New this morning, we're now hearing from a reverend who's suing the Oklahoma Department of Corrections for allegedly denying an Oklahoma death row inmate the right to have a clergy of record.
A clergy of record is someone who is ordained and designated by the inmate to be present during the execution. We told you Scott Eisenberg is scheduled to be executed Thursday, and Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood says Eisenberg was denied his right to have Hood at the execution.
We didn't decide to do this based on delaying or stopping the execution. We did this to protect my religious rights, Scott's religious rights. And, if this has the effect of delaying or stopping the execution, then that is on the Department of Corrections.
The lawsuit argues denying a clergy is a violation of Eisenberg's religious freedom.
Yeah, this was such a unique moment. But then again, it wasn't. It was a unique moment in that you have a state trying to deny a chosen clergy after the Supreme Court said that the condemned could have their chosen clergy. That was unique. But what wasn't unique about it is the fact that government overplayed its hand. Government thought that it could step into this void of spirituality and do whatever it wanted to do. They said that since I was involved with all of the Dallas stuff, that I was a threat to the execution, everyone in the execution chamber. Well, I'm a big guy, I guess. But when you go in there, they have about 16 officers around you. I'm not sure that the Incredible Hulk could be a danger to the execution.
That if this execution is delayed based on this situation, you can blame the Department of Corrections.
We would like for the process to proceed.
The Department of Corrections needs to correct itself before it wrecks itself.
Attorneys for Scott Eisenberg and his spiritual advisor, Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood, are suing the Department of Corrections after Hood learned the DOC won't let him in the execution chamber with Eisenberg this Thursday. In a statement to News 4, the DOC says, quote, "Out of respect for the families of the victims, ODOC will not allow the outburst of activists to interfere regardless of that activist's declared role in this process." Adding that Hood, quote, "has been arrested multiple times for such outbursts in other states, demonstrating a blatant disregard for the experiences of victims' families."
According to the standard that the Department of Corrections has set, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wouldn't be allowed in the execution chamber in Oklahoma.
As an anti-death penalty activist, Hood has been arrested during peaceful protests for what he calls basic civil disobedience.
Someone at the Department of Corrections called me a woke preacher.
Hood says he's agreed to play by the rules and has been allowed to visit and talk to Eisenberg along with other death row inmates for months.
Department of Corrections is asking us to believe that I wasn't a security threat then, but I am a security threat now.
Meanwhile, the family of AJ and Patsy Cantrell says they didn't know about this until News 4 reached out. But if it delays the execution, they say let the spiritual advisor in.
I don't think we would have any heartburn over his spiritual advisor sitting in. I see no reason to delay it because of that.
And the family tells me they've been praying for Eisenberg and that he has, quote, repented and will accept the grace of God. An attorney for Hood and Eisenberg says they'll file a motion to stop the execution unless Reverend Hood is allowed in the chambers. We also reached out to the AG's office, but we did not hear back.
Yeah, I mean, we're continuing on in this battle and this fight to stop this incredible encroachment of religious liberty. It shows that unless you fight back, unless you take a stand, government is going to keep pulling and pulling and pulling at your rights. And this is definitely us standing for my rights, but also, and perhaps more importantly, standing for Scott's rights. That's been a hallmark of my work, that the rights of these guys extends all the way through their lives. And it doesn't end at the execution chamber. Our rights matter. And if Scott Eisenberg's rights don't matter, then our rights don't matter.
Also tonight, the man executed for killing a Houston family more than 30 years ago remained defiant until the end.
Arthur Brown Jr. was convicted of killing a pregnant woman and 3 others during a drug robbery at a home in Southwest Houston in 1992. Family and friends of the victims, including one of the survivors, watched Brown's final moments tonight.
He maintained his innocence until he was injected with the poison that would end his life. ABC 13's Courtney Fisher has followed this case for years and witnessed tonight's execution. She joins us live now from Huntsville with the latest. Courtney?
Yeah, good evening, guys. Until the moment that Arthur Brown Jr. took his very last breath, he denied killing these 4 people in that home on Brownstone Lane 30 years ago. The victims were here to see him die. The family members sitting together. You had 3 members from the Tovar family next to 3 members from the Quinones family, and they sat there in silence. Here you see them arriving earlier this evening at the Walls unit shortly before 6 p.m. to go into the execution chamber. I was in a different viewing room as them, the room usually reserved for the inmates' family and friends, but Brown only had a chaplain here on his behalf, and his spiritual advisor was with him in the execution room reading from the Bible, the book of John. At 6:20, Brown gave his final statement, 3 minutes long. He said in part, quote, "What is occurring here tonight is not justice. It's murder of an innocent man for a murder that occurred in 1992. For the last 30 years, I've proven my innocence to the courts, but the courts blocked me." He went on to say, "My co-defendant was executed in 2006, and if I'm innocent, he was innocent. And they killed an innocent man, and the state doesn't want the truth to come out." Erica?
You know, it's interesting how we get to these spaces in which, we have similar experiences, but they're very different. When Scott Eisenberg was executed, he got a lot of attention because we had this big battle over religious liberty going on. When Arthur Brown was executed, it didn't get any attention at all. In fact, in the news report, it says that his chaplain, came into the prison. One of the things that this spiritual advising work has taught me is that we are going to find ourselves in spaces in which sometimes things are louder or more public. But most of the time, the work brings us to spaces where it's just not. It's about phone calls, visits, letters, conversations that nobody will ever hear. Now, one of the pieces of Scott's execution that I will never forget is the way in which the death penalty action, myself, Abe, Allie, and Scott's attorneys came together to find Scott's daughter he hadn't seen in 20 some odd years and bring her to Oklahoma to spend time with him. That's never been written about. It's never gotten a ton of attention. But man, it was powerful. Man, it mattered. With Arthur, I know how long my dear friend Allie Sullivan here wrote and interacted with Arthur. And Arthur was in a place where, again, very few people cared. I'll never forget that night. We got close to the execution chamber. And Arthur was a very sweet guy. And sitting there and talking to him between the bars, and he talks about what he's going to say. And he says that he wants to reclaim or proclaim his innocence. And he said, what do you think I should say? And I said, you should say whatever God has placed on your heart. Because to not say it is to deny your heart, to deny God. It's such a beautiful moment. And he told me when he was on the gurney that he wanted to thank me. Here is this guy who, is about to be killed. And he said he wanted to thank me. And he said the way that he would do it was that he would shake his leg. And so I go into the chamber. I'm reading out of the book of John. This book that I read from, the story that I read every time I'm in the execution chamber. You who are without sin, cast the first stone. And the faces of the warden and the team that had gathered to execute him, they all look, just fierce. And they can hear those words. They know that it's wrong. And there is Arthur, shaking his leg.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Mark Bradshaw.
And I'm Brenna Rose. A death row minister is suing the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Reverend Jeff Hood is accusing the agency and its spokesman of defamation.
News Tally's Danielle Barr explains tonight the lawsuit is asking for $10 million in damages. Daniela.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. Reverend Hood's attorney says that $10 million is punishment for bad behavior. She argues that what ODOC's spokesperson said is not only false, but damaging. As Oklahoma death row inmate Scott Eisenberg was put to death in January, Reverend Jeff Hood sat by his side.
That they had a guard next to me the entire time. I mean, so close to me that I could feel his breath on the side of my neck.
It took a legal battle for Hood to even be in the chamber. The Oklahoma Department of Corrections was not going to allow him in. Before they changed their decision, spokesperson Josh Ward released a statement saying, quote, out of respect for the families of victims, ODOC will not allow the outbursts of activists to interfere. The spiritual advisor in this case has been arrested multiple times for such outbursts in other states.
These are pictures of 3 arrests. The 3 times I've ever been arrested.
Hood says only 1 arrest is related to the death penalty, and it was outside of a Texas execution chamber.
To act like, the Incredible Hulk is coming in there and is going to stop the execution. I mean, this was an entire charade.
His attorneys Robert Gifford and Kim Cole say ODOC needs to take responsibility.
There's a new day and age that's coming in Oklahoma where people are starting to be held accountable.
We've learned throughout the course of trying to correct government overreach, the only way they respond is if they are held accountable.
News Channel 8 asked Ward for an interview. He responded by saying the department does not comment on pending litigation.
If you thought I was dangerous before they released this statement, if I get a pocket full of cash, I'm going to give all my friends the ability to be just as dangerous. And we're going to abolish the death penalty together.
Hood says he's also a spiritual advisor to 4 other death row inmates here in Oklahoma, and Hood's attorneys told me this process could take a while. We're live.
I'm so thankful for everybody who was a part of that moment. This was like the almost like the sequel, man. It's an Empire Strikes Back kind of moment where we were ready to push back. We weren't prepared to let them just say whatever they want to say, do whatever they want to do. But that's the thing. If we don't fight back, they're going to say whatever they want to say and do whatever they want to do. What was so important about this moment was us saying no more. You're not going to be able to talk about us however you want to talk about it. You're not going to be able to push us around. No more. No more. I think about how it's unbelievable to me that someone could sit behind a desk and just write blatant lies about someone. Blatant lies. And that's what happened. And if we hadn't have pushed back, it would have happened again. I do want to know, and I'm not making any correlation, but the spokesperson that made those statements is no longer employed by the Oklahoma Department of Correction.
Real quick, we have a question from somebody tuning in on YouTube asking, besides prayer, how do you prepare yourself to face so many executions?
Let's wait till the end. Is that okay? I will answer that. On December the 20th, 1996, Julie Buskin was abducted from her apartment complex, driven out to Lake Stanley Draper, and executed, murdered on the shore. For years, authorities had very little evidence and no suspects to go on. They found a trace amount of DNA on a leotard that was found close to the body of Julie Buskin. Using that trace amount, they claim to 6 or 7 years later get a random match on Anthony Sanchez. Anthony Sanchez was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death based on that trace amount of DNA.
It seems like the prosecutors, I mean, they just made up a story. I don't know where they got it from. They wouldn't let none of his family come in the trial. He had to sit there by himself.
What was Anthony like growing up?
He was a happy kid. He had a smile on his face all the time. I mean, he had the biggest grin. If you look at any of his pictures, he's got this big grin. And he was real loving. He's real soft-hearted. From a baby on, he was a good kid.
When he got a death sentence, what was your reaction? What was that like?
It was the worst day of my life, you know, and there's nothing you can do. As a mother, you want to help him and save him, and it was bad. It was just heartbreaking. He had an attorney, a real hateful attorney. I tried to tell him, you know, you need to defend him, and he said, well, we're not trying to get him out right now. We're just trying to keep him off death row. Well, why would you not bring up the evidence that's going to prove his innocence instead of just trying to get him off death row?
So you feel like in the midst of the entire trial and the entire process, there was nobody defending Anthony?
Nobody.
When I met Anthony Sanchez last fall, I sat down with him and he began to talk to me about innocence, and I didn't really know what to think because I hear about innocence from these guys a lot.
You know, at death penalty action, we take every case in order. I mean, we address every single execution, whether they're guilty or innocent. So, you know, this one sort of came onto our radar as one of the 25 in Oklahoma. But when Jeff came and said, you know, this guy says he's innocent, I think he's full of it, I said, great, you know, we'll just do what we usually do.
But, you know, as I kind of pushed more and more into this case, again, it started becoming stranger and stranger as to how this was pinpointed to be Anthony.
Man, the case of Anthony Sanchez is one of the moments that has tried my soul, and I know that it's tried a number of souls of people who have been connected to the moment. Anthony was a very, very special person to me, someone that I became exceedingly close to, and somebody that I gave every possible thing that I had to try to save his life, and came up short. And Anthony had very real ideas about what was supposed to happen. He did not want to do clemency. He did not want to work with his attorneys. And he felt very, very adamant about those things. A lot of times people think, well, it's your job to create bridges and to make people want to work together and love each other and all these types of things. The message of Jesus says that sometimes your job is to bring a sword. Anthony was a situation where he had not heard from his attorneys in over 6 years. It's not my job to defend that. I want to help people love each other. I want to help people to work together. But I'm not interested in handing someone the knife when they want to kill someone that I love. Sometimes we have to push beyond what is expected of an abolitionist. Sometimes we have to move into new spaces of revolution, revolutions of love, revolutions of grace and hope. What we are doing has consistently led to execution after execution after execution. One of the things that Anthony Sanchez taught me, that if execution is inevitable, then I want to die on my own terms. I want to be myself. It has stuck with me and stuck in my mind so much. That statement, if I'm going to be executed, I would rather die standing for my innocence than begging for clemency on my knees. That is our job. We are called to help people stand in their own truth. We are not called to dehumanize, to take agency away. We are called to raise people up in the midst of a system that seems determined to bring them down, to quiet them, to make them behave, to make them do what they are expected to do. Anthony Sanchez brought out in me a fervor to say no more. All the folks who are telling me you're an expert and your expertise seems to be to get more and more people executed, and I'm supposed to listen to you? No more. If all you are doing is causing more people to get executed, and I'm supposed to listen to you? No more. We have to have the courage to say no more when it is time to say no more.
The Oklahoma Supreme Court denied Anthony Sanchez's request to pause his execution. Now the only person who could step in is Governor Kevin Stitt before Sanchez is put to death by lethal injection tomorrow.
It's devastating. I mean, this is not something that is normal.
Anthony Sanchez's spiritual advisor says he was with Sanchez today ahead of tomorrow's execution.
We will meet again at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then, of course, I'll be in the execution chamber with him.
Sanchez was convicted of killing 21-year-old Julie Buskin in 1996. Buskin was a ballerina at the University of Oklahoma. She was abducted, bound, and shot execution style at Lake Stanley Draper. Sanchez became a suspect in her murder 8 years later. DNA, a footprint, a bullet, and a sketch of the suspect convinced a jury of Sanchez's guilt. Yet decades later. So going into tomorrow, does Anthony Sanchez maintain his innocence in this case?
He is more determined than ever to say that he did not do this, that he is innocent, and that he is going to proceed into death, proclaiming his innocence.
Sanchez maintains his innocence, yet this summer he did not request clemency.
And he felt like it wasn't going to be fair. He would rather die standing for his innocence than on his knees begging for clemency.
And ahead of tomorrow, Sanchez told his spiritual advisor he wishes the Buskin family peace.
Clearly said if that is what makes them happy or gives them closure, that he is perfectly content with dying.
Sanchez is set to be executed at the state penitentiary tomorrow morning.
Anthony Sanchez is the epitome of standing on his truth, no matter what. He stood on his truth all the way until the end. I hope that we can be people who stand on truth like that. We can proclaim our truth and be willing to go all the way, like Anthony Sanchez did.
One thing before you died, what would it be?
To not judge your fellow man by the worst mistake that they made, but to judge that man by the lesson he learned from that mistake and how he's applied it to his life.
And I know I asked you this before when we weren't recording, but I'm going to ask you again, and that is if you could say anything to the Williams family, what would you say?
That I'm sorry, that I hope they found some peace, and I hope that they found, reasons to smile at the memory of the person that's gone.
While I'm still recording, is there anything else that you want the world to know?
Love is a better answer than hate.
That's a good word. Love is better than hate. When I met Casey McWhorter, Casey was all over the place, had a lot going on, a lot of things that a lot of demons, I guess is the best way of putting it. And that video represents the beauty of what people can become if given the opportunity. The Casey that I met was fairly selfish. And here you have him talking about love being better than hate. It was so beautiful to be able to invest in his life. So beautiful to be able to encourage him and watch him grow. Man, we can do that for each other. These guys on death row, they are capable of so much growth, so much joy and beauty and love. If we will just open the door. You don't have to be a minister. Just open the door. When Casey was there in the execution chamber, I will never forget watching him on the gurney. He was very calm, and there was a lot of peace. And as the time came, he leaned his head back and looked up at the sky and said, "I'm coming home, Lord. I'm coming home." Such faith. Such faith.
Alabama Department of Corrections has approved a new spiritual plan ahead of the scheduled execution of Kenneth Smith. Smith is expected to be executed in a month by nitrogen gas. That is a deadly gas that has never before been used for executions. Under this new plan, Reverend Jeff Hood will share the Eucharist with Smith before he enters the chamber and will anoint Smith's head with oil before a mask is placed on Smith's face. This has been the focus of recent legal wranglings as of late. Hood sued the state because he says the use of gas violates his religious liberty. The Department of Corrections decision is considered a religious victory, but the lawsuit is not over because Hood says he still has safety concerns.
I don't trust the Alabama Department of Corrections not to gas their own employees, much less to care about me as a spiritual advisor coming from the outside. And so this is an experimental moment. And I think that needs to be said over and over again. The reason we are fighting, we fought so hard for the religious liberty aspect of it is because, again, this is an experimental moment.
The reason Alabama is switching to nitrogen gas away from lethal injection is because of problems it has had with that method in the past. Hood says he plans to hold Smith's feet and pray during the execution process.
Man, this is when things begin to get realer than real, meaning that, the work had already been real before. I mean, I remember sitting there praying with God. I remember Arthur shaking his leg. I remember Anthony just determined to tell his truth. And I remember Casey looking up to the heavens and saying that he was coming home. And those moments have real consequences. You don't just sit there and experience something like that and not be devastated. It is devastating to watch a human being strapped to a gurney and killed. It is devastating to watch something like that and not be able to do anything, to not be able to react at all. It's devastating. But then you get to this place with Kenny Smith where there is a real question as to whether or not you're going to lose your life by trying to ease the life of another. You're having to talk to your family to see whether or not they understand that you might not make it home. Kenny Smith taught me so much. He was such a blessing to my life. And he told me all the time, Jeff, we got this. I say something, oh man, this is gonna be, I don't know about this and I don't know about that. He always said, we got this. We got this. And he told me over and over again. I mean, I thought I was there to comfort him, but he told me repeatedly, we're gonna do this together. I'm walking with you. I said, wait a second, I'm here to walk with you. Oh, no. I'm walking with you. Gosh, when we experience humanity, that's the beauty. It's no longer what we think is possible. It goes so much further than that, to a place of beauty where you can be determined to do what you feel called to do. And that's what I tried to do.
I mean, an unbelievable evil was unleashed tonight in Alabama. Governor Ivey is responsible for what just happened in there. The horror show that just happened in there. Attorney General Marshall is responsible for the horror show that just happened in there. Commissioner Ham, and all the way down to these corrections officers who perpetuated this. Isabel, I've never, ever seen anything like that. That was torture. That was absolute torture. And torture is evil. I thought that was something that, as a country, that we held. That it's wrong to torture people. It's wrong to experiment on people. But that's what I saw. That is what I saw. There's no doubt about it, Isabel. I have seen 4 executions prior to this. I have seen what a lethal injection does. It is a paralytic, and it is a relatively non-visceral looking event. There are certainly, all sorts of questions around that, and I can't get into that. But I can tell you that what I saw tonight was unbelievably visceral. And I think that serves as a warning to governors all across this country that are considering nitrogen hypoxia, because they will be held responsible, if not in this life, then in the next, for this evil that has been unleashed tonight.
Allie, I'm going to get you to go ahead and go to the next video. And also, I know Dee was here, and I'm very Kenny's widow is with us. I'm so thankful for her. I love her so much. But I just wanted her to know that in this next video, I describe what happened.
A method of execution that had never been used anywhere in the world has now been carried out officially in Alabama.
The state putting Kenneth Eugene Smith to death last night by nitrogen gas after the Supreme Court rejected his 11th hour appeal. Beforehand, critics said the use of nitrogen would be an especially harsh way to die. And according to eyewitness accounts, Smith writhed on that gurney for at least 2 minutes before losing consciousness. Joining us now is the man who was in the execution room last night, and Smith's spiritual advisor, the Reverend Jeff Hood. Reverend, thank you for giving us some time this morning on a story that on many levels it's hard to kind of process. Right. It's difficult. I want to ask you your understanding or appreciation of why, since no other place on earth has used this method, why Alabama wanted to be first, and how that news was received by Smith.
Well, good morning. First of all, thank you for having me on. This is just a horrible, horrible morning. Horrible day yesterday. I think there's no doubt that the state of Alabama was desperate to get to a different type of execution, having botched multiple executions in recent years. And so, they were looking for a new way to kill people. And they thought that nitrogen hypoxia was going to be quick and painless. They thought it was going to look peaceful. They thought that he would just simply fall asleep. They repeatedly said in their filings that we would see someone lose consciousness in a matter of seconds. And there is no doubt that that is not what I saw last night, and that's not what happened.
What did you see last night? Can you walk us through a little bit?
It was absolutely horrible. We entered the chamber, and Kenny and I prayed together. We were able to talk for a little while, and he kept telling me that he loved me. Of course, I told him that I loved him. The execution began, and almost immediately, he began to just like convulse. He began to rock back and forth. The mask itself covers from the top of the head to under the chin. It's an airtight suction, and it was had attachments from the back of the mask to the gurney. So every time he convulsed forward, you could see his face repeatedly hitting the front of the mask. There was snot, spit, all sorts of fluid coming from him that was hitting the front of the mask and drizzling down. There have been, I guess, estimates that this lasted as long as 22 minutes. You know, in the past year, I have witnessed 4 executions. In 2023, this is the 5th one in 13 months. I witnessed Alabama's last lethal injection back in November with Casey McWhorter. And I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is I have a direct comparison to what I've seen in the recent year, and what I saw last night. And what I saw last night was, it wasn't just cruel and unusual punishment. It was torture, quite frankly. And it's unbelievable that our country that runs around the world preaching human rights could let something like this happen.
That was obviously, no matter where you stand on this issue, because it is a continued debate in this country, and no matter where you stand, that is definitely difficult to hear, and I'm sure it was difficult to relive and recount for you. We were supposed to have a local journalist on the show today, and late last night, that journalist had to cancel because he did not say that there was not the proper mental state to continue and to actually talk about that this morning. As you mentioned, you've experienced this before. Your mental state then compared to after what you saw last night, because I think that's the part that people forget, that the witnesses in the room, the family in the room, the spiritual advisors in the room, the people administering the lethal injection, whatever it may be, whatever method it is, what is your mental state today in comparison to what you've seen before and have felt before?
Well, lethal injection, obviously, the first drug is a paralytic. So what you're talking about is someone who's paralyzed, who's given lethal drugs, and it looks as if they're simply falling asleep most of the time. With this, it was much more visceral, and you're seeing moments of excruciating pain and suffering. And, you know, the horror of last night will stick with me forever. One of the things that I told Kenny, promised Kenny, is that I would do everything I could to get out there what had happened. And I think that if this is allowed to happen anywhere else or to happen again, I think that we will continue to lose our humanity. We'll continue to digress into this evil. And I think that it's hard to tell our young people not to commit crimes, not to hurt each other, not to be violent when we perpetuate violence and torture and cruelty such as this.
We have less than a minute left. Let me just ask you a devil's advocate question here, because I'm sure you've heard this before. For the person watching at home going, well, why the hell do I care that this man suffered in death when he was a convicted murderer? He was a hitman paid to murder someone, and he did that. So why should I care about his suffering and his pain and discomfort as he died?
You know, it's always a great question. The bottom line is, this is not a question about the righteousness of Kenny Smith. There's no question that he committed a horrible crime. Horrible crime. This is the question of the righteousness of us. Certainly, Kenny Smith, again, was, unrighteous. But who are we to say that we are righteous enough to kill someone? Who are we to say that we are righteous enough to throw the first stone? I think when we begin to categorize people and rank people, we are in a very, very awful way. And, of course, all of our standards are different. So who gets to judge?
Thank you for your time and for a really thoughtful conversation about a very difficult and divisive topic. Reverend Jeff Hood, thank you again,
Bless
sir.
you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I think about where I've been and where I'm now, and a lot of this work has been defined by such tremendous trauma. And I don't know the answer, like why I keep on doing this, or why, on a practical level, I think most people would say because you're nuts. And the thought does occasionally cross my mind. But on a spiritual level, you do things because you feel called to do them. You feel called to go to places that nobody else would go. And I've always asked God to lead me to such spaces. I have this reoccurring dream/nightmare. I'm in the execution chamber, watching one of these guys. Sometimes it's Scott. Sometimes it's Arthur. Sometimes it's Anthony or Casey or Kenny. There's all different faces, but the dream is the same. The execution starts, and they're about to kill him. And I'm desperate for it to stop. And I try to speak. I try to say something. And no words will come out. It's like my lips are sewn together. And I wake up every time I have that dream. Excuse me. And feel like I need to tell whoever I'm dreaming about, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to stop this. I'm sorry that I failed. So it's not just sitting there and holding someone's hand, praying with someone, reading scripture. I'm trained to do all those things. I'm a priest. I can do all those things blindfolded. But what I've never been prepared for is, again, the feeling that it's my fault. That if I had worked harder, I could have ended this. If I had written more letters, I could have ended this. If I had done this or that, I could have ended this. I could have stopped this somehow. So I don't look at any of this as any sort of triumph or anything like that. I look at it as a failure. And I know that sounds weird. You know, you spend, an hour and 20 minutes talking about all of these things that you've done. And then you get to the end and you don't know what else to say except I do. I feel like a failure. But I do take solace in the fact that this is Holy Week. And I know when Jesus was getting marched to the cross, getting beat and bloodied and all that kind of stuff, up on the cross, he must have felt like a failure too. But the story doesn't end on Friday. There is a resurrection. So I believe, like many of you, as we fight to abolish the death penalty, feels like there's a lot of failure. It feels like there's a lot of pain, a lot of hurt. But I do believe a resurrection is coming. I do believe that we will win. And so I continue my work in the midst of failure, because I know that the state, this evil that is the death penalty, will not get the last word. Amen. All right, Allie, clap for me. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, when we can do any questions that people have. And I saw a couple of people have had to leave in the chat, and thank you so much for being here. And it's just a really special experience to have some of these conversations in the midst of such dear friends.
So I'm gonna go back to the first question that we got a little while ago from Debs, asking that how do you prepare yourself besides prayer to face so many executions?
Man, I don't know. I know that it's gonna sound interesting, but I just try to love the person more and more and more. And I feel like the more that I love the person, the more that I'm preparing myself to love them until the end. And I feel like that's my job, is to love them to the end and even beyond. And I think some of what I've tried to share tonight is that love that I've experienced with them and beyond.
I'm just looking to see if we have any other questions.
I think there's
Yeah, so Charles asked, is there a program that promotes and provides training for those that want to be a spiritual advisor?
That is a great question, Charles, and a complicated one. I mean, I think that there's a lot of seminaries and divinity schools that would say that they are training people to be spiritual advisors and whatnot. But in terms of someone that is specifically trained to be a spiritual advisor on death row, I don't know that that exists, but it should. And Charles, reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about that, and figure out ways in which, I think that there's probably, I don't know, Al, you might know, but I mean, there's probably a solid 5 to 7 of us that do this work on a regular basis nationally. Maybe a little less, but and we all come from spaces in which we weren't trained to do this. And what I mean by that is specifically weren't trained to do this. And so, for me, I think that it's something I've learned as I've gone, and would love to do my best to share with others.
I don't think that there are any more questions, so I think we can begin wrapping up.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I saw that we have a number of people from all over the place, Mississippi, and I saw Mitzi and Dee was on here, and just various people. Dear friend from church, Michael Hoare, was on here, but Sandy's got a question. I knew she was going to swoop in with one last question.
Sandy's asking if you can speak to the vicarious trauma you've witnessed among the correction officers and wardens, etc.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I experienced with Kenny's execution was just the horror that people had. I mean, just the utter horror that you could see it in their faces. I will never forget the regional director of the Alabama Department of Corrections. She was in the room, and before it happened, she was very tough, like almost like I don't want to say joyous. That's not the right way of saying it, but very poised and ready to take Kenny's life. And the wilder, more visceral, more awful that execution got, the more she scooted away from the gurney, and she had on it was like black, like patent leather, like church looking shoes, heels, and every time and she was moving her feet so much it felt like she was tap dancing. You could hear like a tap 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 in the chamber when all this is going on. And so I think a lot of these folks try to act like it doesn't affect them, but there is no doubt that it does. And if you can do this and it not affect you, then I think that says a lot about something. I mean, if this doesn't have an effect on you, I mean, it doesn't get less human than that.
A question just popped in from Beth asking if Alabama is planning another execution by nitrogen.
So they are certainly wanting to perform another nitrogen execution. It's my prayer that it will be stopped in court, that the court will recognize that this is cruel and unusual punishment and stop it.
I just put a petition that we have for Alan Miller in the chat because from what I've seen, they are wanting to try to attempt to execute Alan Miller again. Like Kenny Smith, he survived the first execution attempt because they couldn't find a vein. So the petition, it hasn't recently been updated. However, that is still the petition if the execution date gets reset.
I think
I think we're good.
I think that's good. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Let's see, we got as for Megan, I wanted to just add that I met Dr. Nitsky, and Dr. Nitsky is he's the I think he's the head of Exit International, which is a euthanasia organization, and he testified as to what nitrogen does and why this process was problematic. But you know, I think he was, when we met each other, he was very surprised to talk to me, and I was very surprised to talk to him. And it's interesting, Megan, how this work brings, you know, odd people together, and you know, people who might not be on the same team otherwise, fighting for life, for humanity.
So we just had another question that popped in, so I want to make sure we get to it. Phil is asking, how do we help you in this work?
Yeah, that's a very you know, I think prayers and maybe an occasional note on Facebook. But yeah, sometimes it is, I do get lost in like the solitude of it, the loneliness of it, because you know, the people that you work with, everybody dies. And the people that you come to love, they die. But yeah, send me a note on Facebook, and I'll have something better by then.
Alrighty, I think we are gonna wrap this thing up. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alex.
Of course. And we have just a reminder before we get off of here, we have the forecast tomorrow night. Many of you guys who attend know that that normally happens on the first Sunday of every month, but due to the execution of Michael Smith being so close to the beginning of the month, and then of course the holiday weekend, we opted to make it tomorrow night, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Would love to see you guys all there.
Yeah, and I guess I probably should say that I want everybody to certainly be in prayer for Michael Smith and his family. That will be my next execution next Thursday.
Alrighty, guys. Have a good night.
Hold on, I'll say a prayer. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
God, guide us to your love, to your grace, to your justice, that we might be love, grace, and justice. Amen.
Now have a good night.